Welcome to Morning Chava. On this podcast, we are going to dive into fun, educational, and sometimes hard topics with individuals, experts, and storytellers. Our aim is to fill your day with something that gives you a little life. Chava literally means life, to give life, and we want to help empower you to live your best life no matter what leg of the journey you are on. Whether you are preparing for pregnancy, birth, or parenting, we hope to fill your cup with a little Chava for the journey. So grab your favorite drink, or if you're like me, 2 or 3, and join me for the Morning Chava. Hey everyone, welcome back to the podcast. It is the day after Easter. I hope everyone had a great weekend. We did some celebrating here with family. It's so funny, Jovi will ask about the Easter bunny, but then is terrified of it. We saw him one day and she was like, nope. And of course, we didn't make her go sit on his lap or anything like that. But she kept talking about her Easter basket and stuff and was super excited this year. It's fun as they get older and they enjoy those things. And then we went to church and she got to have a super cute dress. Her favorite color is blue, so everything's blue right now. And it was fun. It was always a good reminder for our faith and spending time with family. If you guys didn't listen to last week's episode, I had on Pam Moore, and go back and listen. She is just such a joy to speak with. She has such great energy. It was such a fun podcast, and I'm really, really glad that I got the chance to chat with her. This week, we're going to have a completely different kind of birth story that we've never heard before. We're going to have some of those coming up. But this is going to be a home birth after a myomectomy, and not just a home birth, but a free birth. So Amber's going to be on the podcast talking about her free birth, why she chose that after having a myomectomy. And for those of you that may not know, I'm going to share with you kind of what a myomectomy is. So it's an operation to remove fibroids while preserving the uterus. So a lot of times when women will have fibroid symptoms and they want to have kids in the future, myomectomy is a good option. It's very effective. Fibroids can regrow, but it is a surgery. So it can potentially affect different things in birth. I mean, there's always risks to everything that we do. There's a pro and a con, right? The pro is removing these fibroids to help fertility function. But anytime you have surgery, there's always risks involved. But I did want to share with you a few statistics, and then we're just going to dive right into her story. It's really cool. We go really deep. She introduces me into certain birthing mind things that I had never really heard of before. It was super interesting. But since it is also Cesarean Awareness Month, I've heard a lot of people who have been well, I have a previous history of myomectomy, so I can't have a vaginal birth. Now, again, everything is between you and your provider, your health history. I do not know, your personal health history, even certain things with your surgery could affect having a vaginal birth in the future. But for the most part, myomectomies do not impact vaginal birth. There is, pregnancies after myomectomies, vaginal delivery rate among women who were admitted and trying for a vaginal birth was over 90%. So, and it's not to say whether the other 10% is because of a previous myomectomy. When our cesarean rate is so high, so it seems like it doesn't really impact that. And I also had a conversation with a provider about this recently, because I have a doula client who had a myomectomy and was asking the same question. And so I talked to a provider about it, and they were saying, no, they can absolutely try for a vaginal birth. However, again, we live in a society where certain things can be pushed on us or fear-mongered, which is why it's super important to know the information yourself. So you might hear a provider say something along the lines of, your incident of uterine rupture is going to double after a myomectomy. Well, that's not necessarily true. It goes up after a cesarean. The incidence of uterine rupture after a cesarean C-section is 0.3%. So even when providers are like, oh, well, you can't have a VBAC because you've had a C-section, it's like, okay, but you have a 0.3% chance of your uterus rupturing. And you still have a chance of your uterus rupturing with zero history of a previous surgery or cesarean or anything like that. Which again, I'll link the VBAC episode in the notes so you can go back and listen to all of that. However, after a myomectomy, your chance of uterine rupture is 0.6%. So does it double from the C-section rate? Yes, from 0.3 to 0.6. But you still have a higher chance of getting hit by lightning than you do from having a uterine rupture from this. However, this is your information, your chance to be like, what is the risk? What does this mean for me? Is it worth it? Is it not? Like, you're the only person who knows what is risky for you, what's not, what's worth it. And having a good provider is going to be your biggest obstacle, because even if they allow for you to AKA try for a vaginal birth, they might be checking every little thing to intervene. So they might be saying, okay, oh, you've been in labor too long. Oh, you've been stalled here too long. Oh, you've been this. We got to go in and intervene, which isn't necessarily true. So finding a provider who's truly supportive of this is going to be your best chance. But it has very, very high success rates. There should not be any reason why you can't vaginally birth after a myomectomy, depending on, again, your personal health history. I'm not sure what it is. There could have been something with the surgery. There could have been something with the way they did the scar or whatever it is that could potentially impact you personally. But for the most common myomectomy surgeries that are done here in the United States, you have over a 90% chance of having a successful vaginal birth afterwards. So I wanted to share that information before we dive in with Amber. And I'm really excited for you guys to hear from her today. All right, we are going to dive into this episode. All right, I have on Amber McConnon here, and she is going to share her birth story with us. And before we get into it, I was introduced to her through a mutual friend that, oh my gosh, Phoebe and I go way back to like 2010. I don't even know what year it is now. We're in 2023. I think it was 2010. It could have been 2009, but we worked together in Vegas. So it felt like a completely separate lifetime ago, right? Like we're both cocktail waitresses. Now we're both like living completely different worlds and lives. But she told me about Amber and her free birth experience. And I thought it'd be super interesting to interview her on the podcast and have her share her story. So I'm super excited to get to know you and to hear from you today. So thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was a whole decision to come around to sharing my story about this, because I'm kind of a private person. But when we were trying to make the decision to go this route, it was really hard to find anything about women that had had free births or vaginal births even after a myomectomy, which is it's a uterine surgery that I had several years ago to have a fibroid removed. So fibroids are super common, but and this surgery to remove them is super common. But women this protocol of like, it's a C-section, like there's no question, that's just the standard of care. And that's what we ran into repeatedly during my pregnancies. Like we went and got, gosh, I don't even know how many second opinions of trying to find somebody that would work with us, of like, just let me try, like we try in a hospital setting, and if things go wrong, then like we're there. And then but it was just that met with this like this fear mongering, honestly. And I started to get really really disenchanted with the medical system of just like, you guys aren't here to take care of me, like you're not listening to what we're saying. We want to have more kids after this. It's like, what level of, because so I've already had one uterine surgery, and then going in there for a second with a C-section, it's like, that's not going to continue to compromise my uterus. That was the terminology they used all the time. Well, you have a compromised uterus. And I'm like, wow, way to inspire confidence in a woman.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we didn't know what free birth meant. I would say about halfway through my pregnancy. So like we're going through this whole journey, and I say we because my partner is just he's taking my son right now, so that we get to have an uninterrupted time. He's amazing, and he was right by my side, and I was really lucky, and not a lot of women get that. And so I want to acknowledge that, like, I say we all the time because it so much was this, like, it was our whole family that made this whole journey together. Um, so we about halfway through the pregnancy, I started just to have these like super intense. My intuition was just screaming at me like, "Don't do this. Don't have another surgery." I had broke my leg years ago. Like this would have been my fourth surgery. I don't come out of anesthesia easily.
Hmm.
Like, and there was just so many things that were pointing to like the alarms going off in your head, where, and it's your intuition, and it's important to, when it starts really raising its voice, to like pause and listen. It's like,
Hmm.
okay, what are you trying to tell me? What are you trying to tell me right now? So we looked around for some options. A midwife was also not going to touch. It's called a VBAM, similar to a VBAC, is a vaginal birth after C-section, vaginal birth after myomectomy. So because they're just uncommon, the biggest concern was uterine rupture. And I had an OB at one point that was doing my prenatal care. I had asked about, like, well, can we consider this vaginal birth? And she looks me in the eyes and she goes, if you were to attempt a vaginal birth, you and your baby could die.
Right.
And I was like,
Yeah.
okay, I won't bring it up again. It was just this like really intense, like, and so, months later, as we're starting to go through this questioning phase and we're doing our own research, and like, I have a background in the nonprofit sector and like with research and in agriculture. And so it's like I know how to pour through some
Yeah.
research journals.
Right.
And my husband is a mechanical engineer. He's we did our research, and we found that the few studies that there were, the chance of uterine rupture was like 0.75%,
Right.
1%. It's like I have a higher chance of getting in a car accident on the way to the hospital to have this scheduled C-section than
Right.
I do of having a uterine rupture from attempting a vaginal birth.
Right.
So all of the pieces were starting to come together, and I was just like, this doesn't sit right with me.
Yeah. Yeah. The fear mongering for me, like just even hearing you say this, like it's so upsetting because there is some research out there. There's not tons on myomectomies, but in one study, women who were allowed to attempt a vaginal birth after a myomectomy, there was a 90% success rate where they were able to birth fine without having to have a C-section. And like you said, like the incident of uterine rupture is less than 1%. So you deserve to know the actual numbers instead of a provider telling you like you're going to rupture and die, or you're going to rupture and your baby's going to die. Like you deserve to be like, hey, there's a 1% chance. It's up to you to decide whether that's worth a risk or not. And somebody may hear that information and be like, you know what, I don't want to risk anything. Let's just do a cesarean. And then there's other people that are like, that's not a very big risk at all. I'd love to see what my body can do. So let's go for it. Like it's the fear mongering and not using actual like research and numbers and studies to back it up. It makes no sense to me. Like in that provider mentality, like there's research on this. Aren't you guys like all about research? Like let's present the numbers and let people make their own decisions.
Yeah. This concept of informed consent
Mm-hmm.
is like, I don't think that those terms are being used in the way that they're supposed to anymore. So,
Mm-mm, mm-mm. And
and I
depending,
laugh, and it's like, yeah, go ahead,
no, I
sorry.
was just going to say, depending on where you live too, I know that in the state of Illinois, midwives are very bound by state laws as well.
Yeah.
So you're in California, correct? It could
Yep.
be similar with some stuff there.
Mhm.
Like I know even like the birthing center that I had my second at, there's so many by state. Like if I were to have twins, I would risk out. If I had gestational
Right.
diabetes, I would risk out. Like there's like certain things that risk you out of birthing there, and it's not up to the midwives, it's
Yeah.
up to the state to determine what they can do. So and that puts a lot of fear on the midwives who even would feel comfortable doing this, because they're like, well, what if somebody found out I did this and then there was a rupture or there was something that happened and my license gets taken away? Like there's so much fear put in by the institutions as well, then it still leaves you without options.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm going to be careful to not name names for that reason, because it's like people put their livelihood on the line, if they step outside of this. It kind of makes you take a step back and think like, why is this so rigid? What are y'all afraid of?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because women are powerful.
Oh,
Women
totally.
are powerful.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what they're afraid of. I'm convinced now. But like, so in the course of getting these second opinions, we did talk to one center. It was a hospital setting, but they do. It's a lot more. They like do water births, and they have a whole like VBAC accreditation, I guess it's called. They have it's they're focused on being able to provide a place for women to come and have VBACs. And we talked to one of the doctors at that facility, and she was like, look, I'm really sorry. You're like, because we brought in like, I had my whole medical history in the binder, and I'm like, okay, here's the things. And I'm like in there with my laptop. And some of these doctors are just giving me this like, whoa, like, whoa, but it's like, I'm at this point, I have stepped out of being told what to do with my body, my pregnant body, and my unborn child, and I'm taking full responsibility for my own health and the trajectory of this experience. And that's I found that to be threatening to a lot of doctors.
Mm-hmm.
And this woman said, she's like super sweet, and basically apologizes like, I'm sorry you drove all of this way, because we live in a rural area in California, and so like had to make the trek down. And she's like, I I'm not telling you that you can't do this. And she was super careful with her words, and I'm thinking like, it's because you are bound by
Mm-hmm.
something here. And she's like, I'm not telling you can't do this. You do have options. You can go past, because at that point I had a schedule. They wanted to take him at 35 weeks. And it's like, also, okay, the lung development that's involved in the last several weeks of gestation, and we're technically in this like respiratory pandemic, like, does that make sense?
Right.
Not a doctor, but like that doesn't make any sense to me. So anyway, so she's like, you can go past that scheduled date, and you can labor at home, and you can walk into any hospital in the country, and they cannot deny you care.
Mm-hmm.
And she's like, that's an option.
Right.
And I know that there exists some midwives that are crazy enough to attempt something like this. And I was like, okay, so this woman's looking at like my whole health record in here for this consult, and she's like, you've had a healthy pregnancy, you're an active, healthy, like whole human being that's really, you seem like you're aware of what you're walking into. Here's the nudge of from some professional that, like, you have options. And I'm really, really, really grateful to this woman for telling me that I had options. And it was like, I don't know why we get so stuck in our heads about stuff like that. It's like, I just needed someone else outside of me to remind me that I have power, and like I have sovereignty. Like I, and that's that again, like circling all the way back to, that's why I wanted to share the story, because I want women to know that they have options, always have options. And it starts to feel like a really scary, like pinned in situation when you're repeatedly in these situations where you're being told that you don't have options, that this is the only way to do it. But it's just this like the fear mongering anyway. So um yeah, that we just, so after like all of these traveling around trying to find the right fit. And I don't even remember, it was somewhere around like the 30-week mark. So I'm like getting down to it, and we're still not sure what we're gonna do. And there's that baby. And we end up kind of, I think it was through Instagram probably, of like the Free Birth Society is a really huge account in this world. And Yolanda Norris Clark, who she's extreme, you know, but it's like she talks about a lot of things that were resonating and made sense of like, okay, you know, there's options here. And I reached out to Emily Flynn from Bloodroot Apothecary, who ended up being my birth keeper. And it was one of those like, there were several different sources that were pointing me to her, but I wasn't paying attention. I wasn't listening to that voice. And so finally we were able to get to meet up. And gosh, I feel like it, once we accepted this, because it was a lot of like my husband and I sitting around and thinking like, okay, we have to be okay with all outcomes here. That's the part of taking full responsibility for your own health, is like you're not putting your faith in someone else's hands that you're going to be okay. And that's such a lie that we tell ourselves anyway, even in like the modern industrial medical complex. Like people still die, people still go into the hospital and they don't come out.
Right.
And so we had to get really comfortable with, you know, I could die, the baby could die, probably not, like the numbers are not there to say that that's likely to happen, but like being able to sit with all outcomes, that was a pretty huge part of the process. And really getting comfortable with the idea of that, like, yeah, we have options and we have control to an extent, but like there's so much in this world that we don't have control over. And you just have to, like, the more you resist it, the harder that experience is going to be. Mm-hmm. And if you're able to just let go and flow with it, all of a sudden things start opening themselves up. And it was like, from then on, that moment happened and it was like, boom, 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 boom. All of these things just fell into place. Mm-hmm. And I just got chills thinking about it, because it was like stepping into a river and just flowing with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I want to point out like a few things that you brought up that I think are really important to highlight, because I know some people listening are going to be like, a free birth, that's so irresponsible. And again, like Amber is somebody who did her research. She knew the numbers, and you made the best decision for yourself and being comfortable with all outcomes. I love how you put that, because that's something that I've reminded myself of, like, because my husband and I want to start trying to conceive again soon. And with our third, like we've discussed, you know, what we want to do. And since there's so many restrictions in Illinois placed on midwives, I'm like, what if I am pregnant with twins? What if whatever? Or what if I have a breech baby? And I've told him, I'm like, listen, if these things happen, I am not just going to the hospital to have our baby. I will drive to Wisconsin. I will, like, it's an hour away. I will drive to Indiana. It's another hour away. I'm like, I'm not going to let birth happen to me, because I know how these births go in hospitals. I know twin moms who are just told, okay, let's schedule your C-section because that's safer. Right. That's not true. Like, there's so much. I'm a birth worker. This is what I live for. I do this research. I know the numbers. Breech birth is not unsafe. Having a breech birth with a provider who believes it's unsafe is unsafe. If you have a provider who, right, totally. Like if you have a provider who knows what they're doing, which they have them in Illinois and in Indiana, which are an hour away from me. I'm like, I'm not going to let somebody just not give me informed consent to be like, you have zero options because your baby's not in the perfect position for me to deliver them. Like, no, This isn't, you're not delivering the baby. I'm delivering the baby. You're here to catch it. Like,
Yeah.
and in case anything goes wrong.
Exactly.
Right. And
Exactly.
midwives know how to handle the in case. It's just all the restrictions put on by the state of Illinois is really upsetting. And I know that there's other states like that too. Like in Nebraska, midwives are terrified to do anything. And that's where I grew up. Like, I know people there who have free birthed as well, because of the lack of midwife care, because of the fear of the state.
Yeah.
I believe that it was even illegal there for a really long time to be a home birth midwife. I'm not sure what it is right now, but so it's not irresponsible. I believe that it's irresponsible to not do your research and to just go with whatever your provider says. I think that that's very irresponsible to be like, you know what, I'm just going to trust and go with it, and we'll see what happens, because that's what I see over and over and over. And like 8 out of 10 times, my friends who have done that all end up in cesarean, all end up in like induction of labor that doesn't go well. Things didn't go to their plan like the way that they wanted. They experienced pain when they didn't want to. They didn't know that this thing was going to happen. There's so many things that pop up. They're like, oh, I didn't know it was going to be a 3-day long induction. I didn't know that this part was going to be painful. I didn't know that these are the actual numbers and research that these outcomes lead to. And so I'm very, very passionate, obviously, as you can tell, about doing your research and making informed decisions for yourself. So I don't know if I would ever free birth, but I also had my first baby ended up in the NICU for a while, which if we were birthing at home, it's not like it was a life or death situation. We would have transferred. She would have been fine. But I love hearing these stories because I think it's inspirational to hear from other people who are making different decisions, but they're also making educated decisions.
Yeah. It's pretty huge. It's a pretty huge part of taking responsibility for your own health. Is you can't do it like, I mean, you can. I know people who are
Right.
just like, whatever happens, happens. And I'm like, that's cool. That's cool for you. That is not how I operate. Like, I
Right.
need a little bit of backing of here's some scientific studies, or like here's some case studies. That was the case studies was the thing that I ended up gravitating more towards during our research, because it was like the studies are, the more I dug into it, the more I was just like, there's a lot of, I think it's called contraindications, or there where they're saying one definitive thing. It's a whole tangent, but anyway, so there were a couple of things that I was like, okay, yes, the informed consent there. Sorry, I'm also like trying to tune out the mom part of my brain because my son crying in the other room. Um, oh, yeah, the free birth aspect of it was, first of all, it was it was like a psychedelic experience. It was so wild. And I'm sitting in the living room where my son was born, and right now, and I'm like, there was, I don't think that I would have been able to have that experience in a hospital setting or even in a birth center. um this is our nest, this is our home, and it felt like the safest place in the world. We still ended up like, I do think that there's a place for both in
Mm-hmm.
in our modern world. Like,
Yeah.
um, the modern industrial medical, like allopathic medical system, there are a lot of different names for it, depending on how far down the holistic health rabbit hole you go. But there's a place for it. We ended up, so to jump ahead slightly, um, I ended up being in labor for about 19 hours, and my son was born. Everything was looking great, but his chest was seesawing, and he came out with a force. It wasn't just like crown and then like break and contraction and then we pushed again. It was like he crowned and then it was like he's here. So I think that, like, and again, this is just my theory, but I think that because he didn't have that like final push on his chest from
Mm-hmm.
that last contraction, he didn't quite clear all of the amniotic fluid out of his lungs.
Mm-hmm.
So we ended up going to the NICU, which is about an hour away, and he was on a CPAP machine for a few hours, and then he's been fine. He hasn't had any lung issues since. So it's like, I'm glad that I had that available to me.
Right.
I'm not completely against um medical intervention, not at all.
Right.
But I think that that the biggest message that I want to underscore is that our bodies are built to do this. And there's so much about the way that birth has been pathologized that's like, it takes the this the like it separates women from their strength. It separates women from this, like, I dropped into this place to be able to do this, that was like primal. And like, I had in my birth story, I talk about like, so um during pregnancy, women will exist in this there's beta, oh gosh, I'm blanking on all of the different brainwave states now. There's like your beta state, where this is just your functional brainwave state, and it's where your rational mind lives. This is where your logic centers, like to-do lists, judgments, all. It's like we all kind of exist in this beta state most of the time. Texas, it's okay. Come here, lay down. And then during pregnancy, that's what it was. Yeah, during pregnancy, women more often exist, their default state is alpha, which is lower. It's a drop down. And it's I think also this is like why the term pregnancy brain exists, because it's like, oh, you're just spaced out. It's like, no, you're tapping into the cosmos, honey. Like, you don't have room for all of these other to-do lists and all of this stuff that keeps you in the here and now. It's like, you have bigger stuff to do,
Mm-hmm.
and you got to get ready for that journey. So women in pregnancy, alpha is like where you're kind of living. And it's why, it's why food tastes so good when you're pregnant. It's why everything's so beautiful, because you're in this, just like this essence place. You're seeing life and how alive it is all around you. And then once I went into the birth portal, and I know some of this terminology sounds like, this chick drank too many crystals. Like, like what? But I mean, I don't know. Like, I say all of this thinking like, I know how crazy I sound, but also I know what I experienced, man.
Right.
So like, shrug if you want to, like, I'm not, yeah. So when I went into the birth portal, it was, you drop down into theta, which is lower still than alpha. And it's like, you get into this dream state, and you know what's going on, and you're aware of your surroundings to a survival extent. Like, if something were to happen, you could like very quickly bounce back up and be able to take care of whatever. But you're dropping in. And that was what my birth keeper kept saying. I was like, you need to drop in. You need to drop in. And the more we went on into the labor, delta state is like, we're talking 5 brainwaves per second, I think it is. So like beta is up here, and I might want to check these numbers again, but I think beta is up somewhere around like 100 or something. So deltas, it's like slow. It's slow. And you are, the way I heard this described too, and this made so much sense. Theta is where your subconscious mind lives, and that's where you can do like all your shadow work, and that's where this whole like encyclopedia of everything, every experience that's ever happened to you that's held in theta brainwave state. And then delta is the cosmic realm, and that's where the baby is. And so I knew I needed to be able to get down from alpha into theta into delta to get my son and bring him back with me. And that's what the birth portal ended up being. And like, again, like, I don't think I would have been able to do that in my full power in a birth center. I needed to do it here. I needed to do it in my home. And yeah, it just, yeah.
I'm gonna have to look into this. I've never heard of
Right.
those like the alpha, beta, delta, theta, like birthing mind thing, but I can agree with you kind of on the birthing portal thing because I had two completely different experiences with my first and with my second. And with my first, I did end up getting an epidural when I was probably like 8 or 9 centimeters dilated after like being in labor for like 19 hours. And she was sunny side up. Like it was just a lot, a lot, a lot. The second one, I did a lot more mental preparation. And I listened to birth affirmations like every single night before I went to bed. And then when I went into labor, like it was just such a completely different experience with my second at the birthing center. And there is a part where you do enter like a completely different dimension and your body just takes over. And it was wild. It was really wild. I just remember like days, weeks, months after having my second being like, wow, that was the wildest experience I've ever had in my life. Like it was so cool. And also just like, yeah, you're like there but not there. You're like in a different world basically. And
Oh,
that labor actually was way less painful than my labor with my first where I had an epidural. That one was actually way more painful. With my second, it was less painful. I mean, there was definitely still pain. After I had her, I was like, I'm done. I'm never having kids again. And then like 2 days later, I'm like, all right, let's have more.
right.
But also like it's weird because like as wild as it was and like tough, like I always like tell my husband like I cannot wait to give birth again. Like we're not like ready to start trying again yet, but like I'm so excited to like give birth again because it was this cosmic experience. There is like a birthing high, like it's wild. Like that up until that point, like the biggest thing I could ever compare it to was I went bungee jumping off one of the largest bungees in the world. And after
Whoa.
that, I was like on an adrenaline high for days. I was like, that is the highest I've ever been in my life. And I've done drugs before. So I'm like, that was crazy. And I'm like, birth is like even next level. It was like, holy crap. Like, this is so wild what our bodies can do. Like, that I was able to do that, that we are able to do that, that we're made to be able to do this. And it was just
Yeah.
like, definitely you enter into a birth portal for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I say that it's like a psychedelic experience. I fully mean that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is completely wild.
I'd like to dive a little bit more like into like your actual labor
Yeah.
and like what that was like for you because um I mean everybody's experience is so different and
Yeah.
I tend to see like being a birthing worker just like the first time labors are really really hard because your body's
Yeah.
never done this before and it's prepping the way for more children if you are going to have more and it's can be it's a huge mental game. And so like
Totally.
not having the option to do anything else except for to get through it. Like what was that like for you?
That's a really good question. So I had, I think, three false starts. Because I carried to just past 42 weeks. That was another thing. Everybody was freaking out
Yeah.
because it's like at that point I'd stopped going to my prenatal appointments, I think at 28 weeks. No, 34 weeks somewhere. I don't know. Time
Mm-hmm.
also became
Yeah.
a non-issue. I was just like, we're rolling with this. So I had stopped going to my prenatal appointments and it was like I had to I had to deal with the family aspect of it because like you had mentioned before, like some responses to this, to hearing this, is like, oh, this chick's so irresponsible, like how could she do this to her family? And it's like that was hard. And my I ended up, it was like the Tuesday before I gave birth on Friday. And I think Tuesday, I turned off my phone. I just turned off my phone, and my husband was fortunate enough to be able to work from home that week. And because we were just like any second now kind of thing. And I'd already where we were sure the last time it had like a week before of like, this is it, this is for sure it. And then the contractions sort of petered out after about 6 hours. And it was all practice labor. And I looking back, I'm like, that all happened for a reason. Because each time they were getting longer and like it would get more drawn out. And it was like he's getting into position. He knew the environment that he had to work with. He knew that, okay, so um, there's this scar from this previous surgery. Like, I gotta work around this. I gotta help my mom get through this. And so as much as possible, we try to create an environment where it could just unfold the way that it was supposed to. And that's the part to me that's the biggest key, I think. That's the keystone of free birth, is letting the body do what it is designed to do. And it came down to like, no one is going to come and save us right now. Like, sure, we had like three different birth plans. Okay, like if this happens, we're going to go to this hospital, and here's the protocol, here's the phone calls, and like we grab this bag. We were ready for whatever. But there's also an aspect of like surrender that I had to go through, because God, I somewhere in the middle, it was like 19 hours of labor once we were actually like, okay, this is it. Um, Somewhere in the middle there, I remember looking at my husband and just like, I'm so exhausted. And I remember looking at him and being like, do we still have any options? Can we go to the hospital? I can't do this anymore. And he just rubbed my back and said, we're not going to the hospital. You can do this. And I was like, I hate you, but you're right.
Yeah.
But it's like there was, and I've read about that too. Like there's a
Mm-hmm.
turning point for a lot of women, or it's just
Yeah.
like that. I think it's called a transition.
Yeah, it's during I hear that also at like almost every single birth when you're like, I'm done. Yeah. And usually you're in transition and it's getting closer. And then after that, I mean, you can tell me how yours was. It almost seems like your contractions become more productive. Like
Yeah.
then you're like, oh, okay, like I can feel the baby moving down the birth canal. I can feel my baby getting closer. It's like all this transition, all these contractions. Obviously, all of them are bringing the baby closer. But then once you hit transition, it's like, whoa, okay, I'm done. And then your body is like, nope, we're so close. Like, I mean, it still could be hours, but there is a shift and there's a mental shift. I feel like that's also almost where that birth portal is. And you go in it, and your contractions start to feel more productive. You're like, oh, they're doing things. Like I can feel the baby in my vaginal canal, like that was
Yeah.
the craziest feeling. I'm like, I feel the bones of her skull in my vagina. Like, this is wild.
Yeah. Like, but that full experience, I think that that's important. And you know, an epidural cuts you off from sensation, and that's, I think sensation is the term that I ended up
Mm-hmm.
using to explain it, because I've
Versus
had,
pain.
yeah, it's not pain, it's sensation, and it's instruction. It's instruction too, of like, okay, I need to move my left leg
Yeah,
further out. I
totally.
need to squat. I need to walk. I need to sway, like whatever it is. We used, oh my God, a rebozo as
Mm-hmm.
like this long scarf situation, and a birth ball. That ended up being like, God, it was a really physical birth. Like, I give so much love to my birth team. We had a doula, a birth keeper, and my husband and I, and my son. And it was like everybody worked,
Mm-hmm.
and they were able to do it in shifts. But it was the thing that towards that end, after I went through transition, it was like, I need to get low, I need to squat, and I need to put my arms up and like kind of pull as much space as I can out of my torso. And so we had different configurations all over the house. the birth ball and the rebozo and someone sitting in a chair and hold and like with the rebozo strapped and I'm like holding and I'm like, oh God. So it was yeah, when you get again, I didn't have an epidural, but from what I understand in the birth classes that we took, which were through the doula that we had, her name's Patience, and her practice is called a touch of patience birth work. I had two like different sides of my personality. My doula was just like, her Patience is this, she used to work in the medical system. She was a nurse, and like she decided that she was going to become a doula because she wanted to follow women from start to finish rather than having to clock out and then not know where something happened, like where the thing went with someone that was in labor. Very like, she likes lists, and she helped us build our birth plan, and like more type A side of my personality. And then Emily was just this like divine birth keeper of, you have all of this power in you and you don't need any of these things, they're just distractions, you need to look within. And yeah, so the combination, like we had this like whole vibe. Yeah,
I
go
would
ahead.
like to ask, what is a birth keeper?
That's a really good question. So birth keeper, and this is where you work in birth, so you'll be able to fill in some of my knowledge gaps here. But traditional midwifery is much more focused on, and this is again how I understand it, is much more focused on um, like unassisted birth, and being there for a woman to be able to birth like without intervention, without like holding the space. The birth keeper is essentially there to hold the space.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what Emily said all the time. She was burning sage and like making sure that I had bone broth and coconut water, and like she'd bring me these spoonfuls of honey, like God,
Mm-hmm.
towards the last bit where I was just like, I can't, like I'm fading out. And
Yeah.
she told me later, she's like, I saw you click in and out of consciousness in your eyes when I looked
Right.
into your eyes sometimes where you were not there. And I'd shove a spoonful of honey in your mouth and you just like kind of come back online. It was so that's what a birth keeper is, like the person to walk you through,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
but not walk for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And a doula, yeah, so Emily is not, she's in very careful to make this distinction. Her website does a great job of explaining what a birth keeper work looks like. And she does not have a doula certification. Patience does, and Patience has the medical background. So when we were building our birth team, it was like, okay, this is my first birth. My body doesn't fully know what to do here, just out of like lack of experience. If we can tap into like universal knowledge of, of what a woman's body is able to do, then yeah, I know what to do. But my current consciousness, like I've not done this before. So I was really careful about, like, I want Patience and her medical background, and Emily and her like connection to, you have the all of the information and the whole blueprint of how to do this within you already. um so does that answer the question?
Yeah, it does. And birth keepers. So birth keepers in a sense are doulas, but doulas are not necessarily birth keepers.
Yeah.
Because also like when you become a certified doula, you are like, sometimes you have like different limitations based on like your scope of whatever organization you're certified through.
Right.
Whereas like yeah, the birth keepers kind of are like more of a guide,
Yeah.
right? Is
Yeah.
that like a
Yeah,
little
I
bit?
mean, and like I I think that you could make the parallel of like like if you were to do an ayahuasca trip, the birth keeper is the one that's like kind of making sure that everything's cool on like in the real realm so that you can do this experience.
Yeah, yeah, I can see that. It's very interesting. I wonder if that would like somehow get around some stuff here because recently it's so frustrating. There's a hospital here that now, if you're going to have a doula, the doula has to sign a piece of paper that says that she's not going to interject or speak on your behalf or even
Oh,
really
wow.
advocate for you. And I'm like, this is a piece of garbage. Like, this is such BS. And
Yeah.
like, basically saying, like, and it's weird because like when I was certified as a doula, the program that I went through, also like I'm like, oh, I'd love to learn how to advocate for women. They're like, oh no, 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 we don't do that. Like you're not an advocate. You help them make the best decisions for themselves. But I've been getting more and more passionate about like, hell no, I am an advocate. And
Yeah.
if there are things happening that are not cool, like I am going to say something. That's my job to also to hold that space and to protect. Like no, I'm not going to make decisions for my client, absolutely not. But if I know something's within her scope and she's in that birthing space and being like, no, 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 she said she doesn't want that,
Yeah.
like that absolutely is my position in my job.
100%.
Like, and so it's so infuriating that like hospitals are trying to do this. I have a friend who's a doula in DC, and there's hospitals there that make you sign a form, a waiver as
Wow.
well. And I'm like, then don't hire me as your doula. Hire me as your friend. Like,
Yeah.
I'm her
And
friend. I'm
that's
not a doula.
and that's what part of the conversation before we went into, because we sat around this very table and we're like, okay, here's the battle plan. Like if shit goes really sideways, sorry, cursing, but um, it was Emily was very, very clear on like, if we do transfer to a hospital, you did not hire me. Like, I am not, there's the whole liability aspect of it is it's really sticky because she's assisting women to birth outside of the system. And once you start crossing that threshold back into the medical system, it's like, wait, who's this chick? Like, what's going on here? And it's like, listen, none of your business, like she's just here as my friend. And that sucks. Like, for
Right.
one, that sucks that that's the place that we're in.
Mm-hmm.
Really? So, like, I'd rather just be honest and like on the same page with everybody that's involved in a
Right.
thing. But that's not an option anymore because it's like this has taken, the like that's so like your description of you're not allowed to advocate, you're just allowed to like help them through it. It's like that's word salad. Like what does that even mean? You
Mm-hmm.
just said two completely contradictory sentences. So yeah. Anyway.
Right. Yeah, totally. And I mean, and on on the form too, it's like I will not perform any medical like procedures, and I'm like, well, obviously, like I don't
Yeah.
do that. Like I'm not a medical professional. I don't perform. I would never be like, oh, well, if she's like, oh, I want to see how dilated I am, and I'd be like, oh, the doctor's not here, I'll check. Like I would never do that. Like I
Right.
don't even know how to do that. But
Yeah.
but right, like my job is to advocate. And like then for people listening, if you ever feel like you're in a situation where like you're not being heard, and people aren't listening to you, first of all, I would call the hospitalist, request them, or the chaplain, and request them to come to your hospital room if you feel like you're not being heard or listened to, or you're finding yourself in that situation, because they help mediate and go between as well. Also, like
Yeah.
hospital policies are not laws. So if they're like, oh, it's policy that you can't eat and drink in labor, it could be like, okay, I understand. I'm going to go ahead and do what I feel's best. It's not a law. Like they can't kick you out. They're not going to like not to, catch your baby anymore. So it's just because they're like, oh, it's policy that we do this. Be like, okay, I understand. I'm going to go ahead and make a different choice. They're not
Yeah.
laws. They're just policies. So I just wanted to throw that in there for people listening. If they're
Yeah.
like, well, I felt like I wasn't heard in my experience, or, whatever it is, like there still are options. But again, like my biggest option is just to really, really get educated and to choose your birth team wisely.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a pretty huge one. Like putting a whole lot of effort into choosing the birth team, and being also deciding who's not going to be there. Um, that was a whole thing.
Yeah.
Like,
Mm-hmm.
because at first I was like, okay, my best friend's gonna fly in from Illinois and my mom's gonna be here. And like we had this really, it was starting to get really like, oh, this is an event. Like, am I gonna have to have this catered? Like, like, and Emily, who one of her functions was the like holding the space, and she was like, at one point had met with me, and had essentially cautioned without saying like, you're making the wrong decision here, of like, it's a lot of people. It's a lot of people, and it's a really intimate moment. And the more that you can eliminate distractions so that you can just be in that delta state, the better that the whole smoother that this whole situation is going to go. And I was like, okay, yeah. So my mom ended up not being there. And my best friend, she, because I went so much further past my due date, she ended up flying back home, and it was like everything happened how it needed to.
Mm-hmm. I have a question. How did that conversation go with your mom, though? Like, are you close to her? Was it really, really hard?
Yeah, yeah, it was really hard.
Because I feel like a lot of people are passive, like being like, you know what, I don't want to cause tension. I don't want to upset feelings. So I'm just going to let this person be there. And then it could not be what you need in the moment.
That was huge, man. Like, that was huge. And I know my mom's gonna listen to this too. So I'm like, okay.
If you want.
But yeah. No. I mean, yeah, like I think though that I'm at a place now. God, if you would have asked me 6 months ago, I would have said like, no, this needs to be off the record. But like I'm at a place now where no, this is cool. And I think enough people are in situations like this.
I know
It's
a lot.
Hard.
Yeah.
It's hard. And how do you navigate those feelings and like holding stuff for other people while you're going through birth where you need to just be focused on yourself? It's hard to go against this narrative that that's selfish to do that.
Right.
And so my mom had a typical, I was born in the 80s, and she had a typical, like, she didn't have an advocate. She didn't have anybody telling her that she had options. She had a C-section after she'd been in labor for like 2 days, and this woman screaming at her, like, if you don't push, you're gonna have a C-section. And it's like, she was terrified.
Yeah.
So this new mom had no one looking out for her. And so we have a really traumatic birth story. And that shit is hard.
Yeah.
And like, and then my sister is younger than me. We're nearly Irish twins. And it was also an emergency C-section. It's like, so she's had nothing but traumatic experiences associated with birth. So when I initially made this decision to, go rogue and like have a home birth, she was not okay.
Yeah.
Then my firstborn. And like once you have, and she said this to me several times, of like, you won't understand this until you have a child and you see them go put themselves in some potentially dangerous situation, and everything in your body wants to stop them from doing it. And I was like, I hear you, I do, but I need to do this for my son. And it was like, we ended up going back and forth about, she was going to be there for the birth because she wouldn't miss it for the world. And my mom and I are very close, but we're also so very similar. And so that makes the whole relationship beautiful, but complex. And I think that it ended up, in the end, it needed to be that this was my birth story and not me going through something to try to save her from her birth story. And that was hard.
Yeah.
That was hard. Yeah.
And I think it's important to have these conversations too, because it doesn't mean that you love her any less. It doesn't mean that, that you're mad at her or that you're robbing her of this experience. It like birth is, when you give birth, it is all about you and like what you need in that moment. And it's not even necessarily that you didn't need your mom there. It's like trying to, again, like set up that space of, okay, if I have to get through this with zero distractions. And yeah, even though like I would love to have my mom here, but like, what if I look at her and I'm like, man, she had C-sections. What if I need a C-section? Like just even things like that can be like crap, like that could take you out of that moment. And that can be really tough, making that decision. And my husband and I were actually really, really grateful that our first baby ended up during COVID and nobody was allowed except for it was him, my doula, and my midwife. And we're like, that was perfect. We're actually glad that nobody else was there. Like, it's a small room, and I would have felt like people were just watching me, waiting for me to give birth. And like, we loved that it ended up just being us. Because for my first, I probably would have been like, yeah, my mom, my mother-in-law, my sisters, like whoever wants to come, come on. So it was, we're like thankful because looking back, we're like, that was perfect. Like, we're glad that nobody else was there. Not that we don't love these other people, but just that it was very much a mental game for me. It was just crazy. And like, I really needed zero distractions.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know that my mom's disabled, and I know that I would have been worried about her because it was a long labor.
Yeah.
And like I said, it's super physical.
Yeah.
And my mom is one of the strongest women I have ever met, but she also has physical limitations, and it's like having to worry about someone else during that time was not going to serve me. It wasn't going to serve my son. It was, yeah. And distractions, it sounds dismissive to say it that way, but it's like, it's a distraction. That's what it is.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And it's not dismissive at all. So, but it is important to choose who's going to be there because I've seen the effects of having family there that you love and that you want there, but who are giving opinions, who are getting in your head, who are saying, you know what, maybe just get the epidural. You know what, like, you've been in labor for a long time. Maybe we should just have a C-section. Like, who are saying these things, and it really does get in your head, and it ends up going that way, and it's really, really tough. Like, I think that even if you are going to have family there, like, having a conversation about like, hey, listen, like, I don't want to hear anything from you. Like, I don't, like, you're here to do what I say, and that's it. Like, because it can really, really mess with you. And I've seen it happen, and it was very heartbreaking. So I think it's really important to choose your birth team wisely.
Yeah, and even down to like, I am super sensitive to other people and the stuff that they have going on. Like, I can read a facial expression, and it's like when you're in that super heightened state, you're gonna read the vibe off of someone that's like come into that space with fear.
Oh, totally,
And
totally.
and yeah, and I was like, well, that's what it kind of came down to. Is it didn't kind it came down to, with my mom, I was like, I don't think that you can show up to this place without fear, and I can't hold that for you. And I'm only going to be worried about you. So like, end story. you
Yeah.
know yeah, it's not even the don't say anything. It's like, you need to be all in
Right.
if you're going to be there.
Right. You need to believe in this
Yeah.
and in me and in, yeah, everything. Yeah, definitely. So how was the postpartum care then? Since you had stopped going to appointments, everything like that, like after you had your son, did you do any postpartum follow-up with any providers?
Yeah, I did have a 6-week appointment with my OB, and it was kind of a quick like check under the hood. Yep, everything looks great. Like, I don't know that I would call it care,
Yeah.
which sucks. But I postpartum has been I'm almost 4 months postpartum now, and it's been a wild ride. It's like, so I tore pretty significantly, and I didn't know that I tore, because like I said, we transferred to the hospital, and got home the next day. So we had a really beautiful like couple of hours after the birth where I was just able to lay with him on my chest. And but then it was like, we're teetering on some respiratory distress. Like, we need, if this has the potential to correct itself, cool, but if it doesn't, hospital's an hour away, so we should just go.
Yeah.
And that's like it was an error on the side of caution. And I don't regret the decision to go to the hospital. It was not fun. And they were not stoked to see us. Like, what do you mean you had this baby at home? That type, the like, that we were awful people for showing up and that we had endangered ourselves. It reaffirmed all of my, like, all
Yeah.
of my,
Yeah.
okay, yeah, we had him at home for a reason because I didn't want to be in this environment.
Mm-hmm.
But got the care we needed, came home. But I had a significant tear, and I ended up healing it all on my own with a peri bottle and an herbal salve, and like just keeping it clean and staying on bed rest for I would say 2 weeks. I tried to avoid really even just walking around the house. And my son and I just stayed in bed and like just as much as possible limited movement and try to stay warm. This is where my husband was like amazing. My mother-in-law came and stayed with us, and she helped just kind of make sure that the house kept running, but she was very respectful to give me space,
Mm-hmm.
and just let me have that really sacred time with my son, and I think it was good for my husband and his mom to be able to like have each other to in that moment. And it was there were holes for sure in my postpartum care. But not on the like there was no fault in it. It was mostly a like I didn't realize the level that I was going to be down. And my husband made a joke at one point of like, I'm going to need to put hobbles on you to keep you in bed so that you can heal. Like, because I wanted to bounce up and do all the things.
Yeah.
And it's really like one of the books that we read, I think it's in the kitchen. It's called The First 40 Days.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Love that book.
really wonderful postpartum book. Anybody that's like approaching that birth portal and looking into prepping for postpartum, I cannot recommend it highly enough. There are really great recipes. There's really great little like stories in between the recipes. It's a beautiful book.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of influencing what my next move might be. And it's like I realize that the lack of support that's available for postpartum is really it's everywhere.
Yeah.
Like there's not this is a really big area that is currently being underserved for women.
Right.
uh, and I think that there's a lot of potential for like helping do like meal prep
Right.
beforehand, or even having meals delivered that are like warming and nutritious and easy to digest. And there's there's also the whole emotional aspect of it, of like you're taking the bottom out and like experiencing this huge hormonal drop from where you were. It's a whole roller coaster. And so trying to figure out how to navigate that with my husband and my mother-in-law,
Mm-hmm.
I was like, you guys love me, but this isn't, I can't be fully vulnerable right now. Like, I need a circle of women around me who've been through this, who can look at me and be like, oh, I know where you are. Yeah, I'm
Mm-hmm.
just going to give you some space right now instead
Yeah.
of like, what do you need? What can I do? It's like that. I don't even know how to answer that question. So, I'm thinking that like I have a background in organic vegetable seed. Like that's what I've done for the last 10 years. Is there and it's like that's a really specific thing. Organic vegetable seed. Worked in the nonprofit sector, the for-profit sector 10 years. So that's what I thought my career was. And it's like going through this process, A, I'm not even the same human being anymore. And B, this my passion has completely
Mm-hmm.
shifted. And it's like I think that postpartum work and building support for women in my community, because there's a whole community of free birthing women that I'm a part of now, that and it's like this is the same story over and over again. Like, yeah, the whole thing, like there was so much, we had this whole plan and everything was beautiful, and then you hit postpartum and it's just like I am alone. Like I am alone and I have this baby and I have no idea what to do and I am in pain and everything feels like too much.
Mm-hmm.
And I have no idea how to do this.
Mm-hmm.
And like I still am feeling the intensity of that whole experience. And I did have a really good support system. I had a beautiful birth and I've had a really wonderful postpartum, but it's still really hard. It's still super hard. And yeah, so like how can I meet how can I meet that need in
Yeah.
my community? That's what my North Star is now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I really look forward to seeing and hearing what you're doing because I feel the same, like, especially with my first. Like, I
Yeah.
felt so isolated. And again, I have,
In COVID, yeah.
right. Well, and I have like an amazing, like, partner who's very supportive and he's, my husband's amazing. Um, and like you said, like, it's just, it's not the same because they operate differently. But yeah, like talking to people who have been there before, I think there's such a huge gap in postpartum care. Like when you're saying there was holes in my postpartum care, I'm like, oh, that's just normal. Like that's the norm. Um, and when you look at other cultures, they really take that time sacred and they have women who come and take care of them, who are cooking these nutrient dense meals that are making sure that you're like in like a lot of places you don't leave the house for 40 days. You don't do all these things. It's not like, oh, a few days later I got to go grocery shopping. Like, no, you're not doing that. So I love the first 40 days. That book is amazing. I made a few recipes before I had my second and like froze them. I love the pancakes in there, so good. I made like a bunch of those and froze them for like easy to have in the morning, but just even the rice congee and like everything, it's so good. So there is such a gap, and that's like something that I feel like I'm really passionate about. I've talked to my husband like so many times, which it's not the season of life for me right now, but I'm like I would love to eventually have like meal care packages like postpartum for people that are these nutrient dense things that have like certain herbs and spices and things that are healing for you during this time that are easy on your digestion and stuff like that, because it's so hard like trying to feed yourself and worry about meal prepping for a family and doing all of that. So there is like definitely a huge gap, and even a huge gap in education, like how to take care of ourselves postpartum.
Mhm.
It's like, oh, I just pushed out a baby. I'm craving a burger. I'm going to down some burger and fries. And, like, yes, it's definitely energetically depleting. So you need to re-nourish yourself.
Yeah.
But I interviewed a lady on here who does Ayurveda, and it was super interesting because she talked about like how having a baby changes your digestion and how you have to nourish and nurture yourself postpartum to get it back to like where it was. So like you're saying, just like warming and things like that are very healing for your gut.
Yeah.
And I didn't know that. So it was very interesting. But yeah, I mean, things do change. Like once you have a baby, I feel like your mind shift. And I can't tell you how many people I talked to that it was like once they had their kid, they're like, oh my gosh, my whole focus changed. I knew I wanted to be a part of birth work, or I knew I needed to fill in this gap,
Yeah.
and things like that. Like the lady who runs the VBAC link account after her first C-section and then like fighting to try to get a VBAC, and through everything she went through, she's like, oh no, I'm becoming a doula. I'm advocating for VBACs. This is what I'm doing. I'm compiling all the research and I'm going to like, help people have access to the care that they need, because of her experience. So I feel like there is something in us that gets ignited and you start to have compassion for others in this season and seeing where those gaps are for you and really wanting others to not have to go through that or to experience the care that they need. So it's not surprising to me after your story that like you want to get into this field.
Yeah. Yeah. I got bit by the bug pretty hard.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I just want to thank you so much for coming on and sharing your birthing story with us. It was really cool. Like I feel like there's so much in there, and I can't wait to hear what people have to say. I'm sure some people will be like, this is irresponsible, but
I'm ready for it.
right,
Yeah.
whatever. I can't believe
And
you had this person on your podcast.
Yeah, Free Birth Society is a really huge resource for anybody that's leaning towards wanting to learn more about free birth, or like, I don't have the online presence at all to support this. I have like a tiny little Instagram page that I'm sure you'll link to in the show notes, of like, message me. That's what I can offer people, is like, I don't have the whole like thing that Free Birth Society, I'm not even going to try to be that, but like, message me. And just, if you need to talk to somebody about it, I'm so thrilled to do that for anybody that needs it.
Awesome. Cool. I will, link that in the show notes for everybody listening. And again, I just want to thank you so much for coming on the podcast and for sharing your story with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Well, I hope that you enjoyed this episode. I always love to talk to people who have had different experiences and just really get in there for why they made the choices that they did. And I thought it was really interesting that just how we view each other and each other's like decisions. And I think that that's something that we can really take away from this episode, is that you're the person who knows the best thing for yourself and can make the best decisions for yourself. So whether you agree or disagree with a decision that somebody makes, that's honestly none of your business. And that shouldn't impact how you view that person. Like how she was even saying that, like, sometimes people think like, oh, if you're going to home birth or free birth, that means that you're uneducated. And it's like, no, I've educated myself so much, so I know every single possible outcome. I know every single thing that could happen. And I feel that this is the safest choice for me and my family. Whereas like a lot of people don't do any research, right? Like the majority of people don't do research into birth at all. They get pregnant, they just go to their doctor, they go to the hospital, and they have their baby, which is fine, but that's not for every person. So I think that it's really important to just respect each other's decisions, right? For each other, for that we make for ourselves. Some of the choices I would make in birth wouldn't be the choices that you would. I'd probably be comfortable with some things you might not, or you'd be comfortable with some things I might not. And that's totally fine. The important thing is that you are informed and educated on your decisions and not being forced into anything, but making those for yourself and having a team of providers that are trusted, that are help guiding you and making those decisions for you as well. Not for you, but with you, that they're helping you make those decisions as well. Because sometimes we do surround ourselves with people who might have better insight into some things. So it is really important to, again, you're going to hear me say this 1,000 times, and I'm just never going to stop. Choosing the right providers is so, so important. Well, I'm really grateful for Amber coming on. I've never really spoken to somebody who's chosen to free birth. As a doula, I've never been at one. Honestly, I've never been comfortable. I had someone ask me once to be their doula at a free birth. And for me, it wasn't a good fit. I didn't feel comfortable going to that by myself, like being the only person with experience, like birth experience there. But I always think that it's really cool to speak to somebody who's been there and done that. And I feel like I learned a lot from Amber today during our interview, and that she really opened my eyes to a lot. So I'm really happy for her and how everything went. And I hope that you enjoyed this episode, and we will talk to you next week. Bye.